Today's session is going to be all about intergenerational projects. What are they? How do they work? Why should we start one? How do we get started, most importantly? So Bella's going to be telling us a little bit about, from her perspective, what's the importance of intergenerational projects? Why are they so special? And how can we start to plan them? And Sonia is going to be telling us a bit about her intergenerational work in Scalable in Shetland. So we're delighted to have them both with us. Let's head over to our speakers. So as I've mentioned, we are joined today by Bella Kerr from Generations Working Together and Sonia Inkster from the Scalable Youth and Community Centre. I always need to get my teeth in to get the full name of the community centre. So Charlotte, if you would just be able to, just spotlighting, there we go. Hello to Bella and hello to Sonia. Delighted to have you both on the call. So we're going to start off with you, Bella. Can you tell us a little bit about, let's start with the basics. What is intergenerational work? What does it mean?
Intergenerational work aims to bring people together, younger and older people, so generations together, and usually is purposeful, mutually beneficial, and promotes a greater understanding and respect between generations. It also may contribute to building more cohesive communities, and intergenerational practice is inclusive in building on positive resources that young and old have to offer each other and those around them. And I think the ideas of the guiding principles in intergenerational work is building relationships by connecting young and older people and building capacity and social cohesion in our communities. And it benefits everyone.
So actually, a lot of the things that people were talking about there are really at the heart of what an intergenerational project is about. That idea that everyone can learn something from someone else in their community and everyone else has something to give. I really like that you pointed out that actually it's about community cohesion as well. It helps you build those networks and those relationships, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
I think one of the things that when I first heard about intergenerational work, probably a little bit before I started this job, my main instinct was, oh, well, that's about babies and grandparents and we get the two together and everyone has a great time. But I think you were great in helping me understand that actually it's about more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, people commonly, I think the programme that was on television years ago, Care Home for 4-year-olds, people had they thought that it was about very small children in nurseries and very old people in care homes. But actually it's about everyone. So generation is 20 to 25 years, and it can be any age. It doesn't have to be very small children. It could be someone in their 20s working with someone in their 45, 50s. We can really, the range of age groups and the skills that can be passed from older generations to younger generations, and relationships that can be formed can be at any age and the spectrum of our life. So I would say that, yeah, it's open. I kind of like to say that it's meaningful, it's reciprocated between the younger group and the older group. And what I probably think is, if we look at things like active citizenship, developing positive attitudes, breaking down stereotypes in our communities, realising that older people are not over because they've retired, they have skills that they can offer, and relationships are formed that are beneficial to both groups, who in their own way are isolated in our communities at times and not listened to. So
I think your point about stereotyping is such an important one. I think obviously ageism is such a problem in our society, and we easily fall into these kind of polarizing situations where we stereotype people of a different generation than us, and it is such an important way to get people together. I'm also really interested that you say a generation is 20 to 25 years, because my youngest sister is only 6 years younger than me, and frankly it feels like she's a different generation sometimes. One of the things I really wanted to ask you was, and again this perhaps comes down to the fact that when we think about intergenerational work we often think about younger people, but what's the difference between something being intergenerational and it being, say, family oriented? Because really, if it can be about everyone, is there a difference between those two?
Yeah, it can be about everyone, but I think the thing that we have to define here is that natural relationships do form in families. And what I probably think and like to point out is intergenerational work has become an important part of life for younger and older people. with relationships formed as a natural part of life in the past and traditions, especially within families. But our modern world has changed, and over the past decades, we've seen a notable decline in intergenerational due to changes within our family structures, relationships, people living patterns and that kind of thing. New roles for working women. There's all sorts of things that have changed over time, family patterns. But what we do see is it's natural for families to have intergenerational relationships within. I can hear someone, hello. To form an intergenerational relationship out with your family is more about what intergenerational is. With our work that we do across Scotland, it's about intergenerational communities, and our manifesto is an intergenerational nation.
I love that, an intergenerational nation. One of the things that struck me when you were speaking is you were talking about the fact that we do tend to have sometimes fewer of those intergenerational relationships in our families now. People move about quite a lot. So for example, I live 3 hours away from my nearest family member. You know, we're all very far flung, and I know that lots of people are in the same position. But for people I know who've been in that position, often they want relationships that kind of almost replicate that kind of intergenerational connection that they would have within their own families. If you don't have an aunt or a grandmother close by, you want to try and replicate that. You want some of that kind of intergenerational knowledge and support. So before I go on to Sonia, I just want to ask you about, tell us, you've told us a little bit already about actually why you think this intergenerational work is so important. Is, you know, it's about the community cohesion, it helps build relationships in our society. Is there anything else that you just want to tell us about why it's so important?
Yeah, I think we need to think further than just, you know, young and older people coming together, and we need to think about things like, it could be intergenerational practice, we've got intergenerational learning, we've got intergenerational relationships, and we've also got intergenerational communities, places and spaces that bring everyone together. So it's not, we can't pin it down to one thing. There's so many, and it's so diverse in how we look at it. But I think if we look at it from the sense of like togetherness among different generations is good for us. It strengthens our community connections. It's opportunity to learn from each other. It improves public well-being and increases community capacity, and it decreases age segregation. So I think if we look at all that together, we see things like reduction in isolation and loneliness, development of positive attitudes towards each other, improve public well-being, and the opportunity to learn new skills. So when you unpack it, it's a bag of tricks. There's so much in it.
I love that expression. I think you're so right, a bag of tricks. Sonia, I want to bring you in now as Bella was talking that actually sometimes we're talking about intergenerational spaces and places. And I think that leads us on really nicely to what you've been doing at Scalable Youth and Community Centre. Let's start off by saying that actually it used to just be the Scalable Youth Centre, and actually recently you've extended it so it's now Youth and Community. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? How did that happen? Why did you make that change?
Yes, I like the idea Bella said about intergenerational communities, and I think that's what we've actually got at Scalable Youth and Community Centre. We were a youth centre and we mainly worked with children and young people, and we lost what was called the preschool, and they went up to the primary school, and therefore we had to look at having some usage during the daytime, and that's when we started to develop things for older people. We had an age and opportunity fair, bringing in all the agencies that actually helped and supported older people. And from there, we set up the 60+ drop-in group. And we also had adult learning in doing yoga. And we moved from a trust to a SCIO, which is the Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organisation. And that gave us an opportunity to change the name from Scalable Youth Centre to Scalable Youth and Community Centre. That was more fitting for where we were moving on to. So we had children's work, we had young people coming in and youth work, and we had older people, and we had families coming in for family events and so on and so forth. So we had an intergenerational community, albeit using the centre at different times. But we had the big lunch in 2016, and that really brought the community together on one big event. And we had a lovely day. We had it outside, we had the street decorated with bunting, we had food, we had entertainment, we had stalls and games for the children, and everybody had a fantastic time. And that made us stop and think, yes, we've got the right feeling here with the big lunch. The community, the businesses were all so keen to keep the flags up for the summer because it brightened up the street. And then we saw window boxes going outside the shops. We saw hanging baskets. Everybody took pride in the community. It was such a fantastic spirit that we developed just by having that big lunch, that different type of event that brought people together. And when we took down the flags, we thought, oh, the street looks really bare. What can we do now? So we decided we would fundraise and get some Christmas lights to string across the street. And that involved the businesses again. And we had a huge Christmas light up, and we saw all this elderly people and families coming to the centre for the light up. So we had set the scene, I think, with the big lunch, that community events brought in people, brought the community together. And that was absolutely fantastic to see. And we continue to do that kind of work. We've had 2 indoor big lunches because of poor weather, and 1 other successful big lunch outside. But we will continue to do that because it's now an annual event and people look for that. Albeit we've had a COVID year, we've not done it this past year, but we don't know what's ahead of us, and we will be looking at doing it again at some time in the future. So the Scalable Youth and Community Centre really is the hub of Scalaway, I would say now. And we have people coming, wanting to book spaces for different things. We've got the elderly people coming to younger events like the exercise classes that we run. And we've got a physiotherapist that actually runs other projects in the centre, like exercise sessions for MS and Parkinson groups and so on and so forth. So it really is the hub of the community.
I think that's brilliant. And you make it sound so simple and you make it sound really easy, Sonia, but actually I think it's what you did was clearly both a lot of hard work and really clever as well, and that you started off with a hub that was being used by one group, you made it somewhere that could be used by loads of different groups, and then you brought everyone together. And I think that's a really nice example actually of how you can expand something that was just for one group and go, well, actually we can make this more. And I'm really pleased as well to hear that the Big Lunch was such a success for you. For those of you who don't know, the Big Lunch is an event that is run every year in the first weekend in June. It's our celebration, our Thanksgiving event for neighbours and communities to get together, to meet new people and to build community connections as well. Shana's just put a little link in the chat box as well if you'd like to find out more about that. Sonia, do you want to tell us a bit about the projects that you've been running recently? Because we had a wee chat before this, and honestly, it sounds like you've been incredibly busy.
I think there's always exciting things to do, and I think you get lots of ideas from children, young people, from the adults and the elderly. And I'm a key volunteer with the over 60s group, and obviously in that age group as well. And we were starting to speak about the First World War, the centenary of the First World War, and just how little some of the younger generations remember, you kind of know about the war, how much they're told about it. And we kind of thought it'd be really good to do a project, and we did what we call the Poppy Rocks project. We painted poppies on stones, just small round stones with a poppy on it. We got the children, the young people, the adults and the elderly ones to paint poppies on these rocks. And I don't know if you've heard of the Roll of Honour. Usually every community has a Roll of Honour, and we had the Roll of Honour for Shetland, and we identified the people that had lost their lives during the war, and the children wrote the name of a soldier or a sailor on the back of the stone and the date, you kind of age that person was. And it was bringing that memory a pretty bit alive. And what we did then was we got the groups together and we marched from the youth centre along to the Shetland Bus Memorial, which is halfway along Burr Street. And we had a piper, a young chap playing the pipes, and they laid the poppy rocks down around the memorial. And it was the day before Remembrance Sunday, so it was very kind of appropriate time to do that. And then we took the children and the families and some of the elderly up to the British Legion, where they had juice, obviously, and biscuits. But the pictures of the men that had lost their lives was on the wall, so the young children could identify the name and point to the picture. And it kind of brought it a bit more alive. So it was a really good, simple project that developed just through discussions at the over 60s. And because we have this community, this intergenerational community that Bella speaks about, we could pull in other groups, and it just worked. It was a fantastic pity project that didn't cost a lot of money, but was very, very effective at raising awareness on what were soldiers and sailors and servicemen and women did in the war.
I think that's wonderful. Because again, it works on so many levels, doesn't it? It's the way that younger people who, for example, like me, I'm several generations removed from anyone who had any living memory or connection to the First World War, but people can connect it not just to their community, but to the lives of people in the community, and sort of go, oh, well, this person lived here. This person is related to the lady that now lives opposite me. And it must have been quite extraordinary to see that really come alive for the younger people.
Absolutely. And I took part in another project which was called Inspiring Purposes. I think that was done through Bella's agency, where they were encouraging grandparents and grandchildren to actually look at somebody during First World War and answer a lot of questions and fill up this, make a story about this person in the First World War. And I did that with my grandson, and we actually won third prize, one of the third prizes, and we ended up going to Edinburgh to receive our award at the Edinburgh Castle. It was absolutely fantastic. But what that project did was it brought that great-great-grandfather of his alive into the family, and they all got to know about what the heroic thing that chap did in the war. And also James had to then relay it back to his class, which was a different area from Scalaway. And down there, when we were relaying it to the class, we got them to do poppy rocks, and we got them to look at the pictures of men and women that lost their lives from that area. And some of the children were saying, oh, that serviceman has the same surname as I have. And we were saying, well, it might be a relation. So they got the photo home with them, and that started the whole conversation within the families. And I thought that was a brilliant project. It was done through the intergenerational agency that Bella works for, along with Adult Learning, Denise Nicholson, and it was a fantastic project that spread the word even wider.
That's fantastic. I'm really interested in what you mentioned just at the end there, Sonia, which is the number of different kind of people and groups that actually really helped bring it to life. I'm really interested, what did you have to do to get it going? Who did you need to speak to, or what helped?
In terms of the poppy rocks?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was really just speaking to the staff that managed the Peary Club and the Youth Cafe project, because we're all one community there. I'm a key volunteer as well as a chairperson, and I manage the staff too. So there's connections is there already. So it's so much easier to actually do things as a group. And it's about just encouraging them to see a different way of, I suppose, raising awareness on an issue or a project. They just seem to all buy into it quite easily and quite quickly.
I suppose I would love to know what advice you would have for anyone who's listening to this and going, we're having lots of people in the chat saying, that sounds fantastic. What advice would you have for anyone who's listening to you and thinking about maybe doing a project like this in their community? Well,
I think it's about having enthusiasm and having a bit of a vision for what could happen if you pull people together. And it's about knowing your community as well. I mean, I'm very lucky, we're not a big community here. We've got about 1,200 people. So it's about knowing the community and just knowing the people that you could approach. And I suppose I come from a community work background, so I'm kind of been doing this for about 40 years. So it sometimes just runs off the top of my head, but it is about getting people to just, you can come together and speak about it, and then I suppose having the space that you can fit people in to do the kind of building up the project.
That makes absolute sense. And I suppose the great thing about that is, even if you don't feel like you have a lot of contacts with people in your community, everyone does have those contacts. So if you only know really well 2 people in your community that you think might be interested, and you tell those 2 people, they might tell another 2 people, they might tell another 2 people. So it can grow like that, can't it?
That's right. They can grow arms and legs very quickly, which is similar to what the second project that we got involved in with young people and the elderly, and that was our street book, where we, through discussions with the over 60s, they started to speak about how many shops used to be in Scalaway when they were young. They didn't have to go out of the village to find work and so on and so forth. And I thought, gosh, this is history here. We have to capture this. And we started to write down all the shops and that. And then we started to do a bit of research. And we got the young people involved so they could learn interview techniques, and they could interview the older people about their life back in 1950. We ended up having to choose a year, and it was 1950. And the number of people that worked in the shops locally, and they could still remember their wages and all the ins and outs of what they had to do in the shop. We were told by the archivist at the museum that it was a fantastic project to pick a date that was in living memory of people, rather as when people look at old photographs or history about something that's way, way back. So it actually was a fantastic project, and it developed arms and legs a bit, because you would speak to somebody about their life in the shop and they would say, oh, speak to somebody else, and so on it went. It was 2 years in the making. COVID came in the middle of it. The young people had just managed to do 2 interviews, so their input was limited, but the idea was that they would be as involved with it. What had happened when I witnessed the first interview with the older person and the young person, they started to speak about their lives and what was different for the young person compared to the older person. I thought, wow, here's another intergenerational project coming up, so there's spin-offs for it. And I think it's absolutely fantastic to get all that history there. And we ended up getting a book printed, 600 copies, and it went within 3 weeks. So it was like a bestseller.
That's amazing. I think one of the things I really love about what you've done, Sonia, clearly there is such a rich seam of intergenerational projects. I genuinely wish we had more time. But that they've all ended up sparking new things and keeping those conversations going. And it sounds like actually it's been a real you've turned kind of an intergenerational project into more like an intergenerational community, like Bella says, and an intergenerational culture, where you're actually kind of keeping those relationships and those stories alive, which is absolutely amazing. I want to go back over to Bella to kind of get some really practical kind of tips on how people can start to do these things. But I'd also just like to say, please do remember that we will have time for questions. So please pop your questions in the chat. If there's anything that Sonia or Bella have said so far that you really want more information about, please do just pop it in the chat. So Bella, let's go back over to you. Oh gosh, so many questions that I want to ask you. So people can adapt, I'm guessing, existing projects to be intergenerational. They can also start intergenerational projects from scratch. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. And well done, Sonia, because it just sounds amazing. And I'd like to connect more and find out more at a later time, because it's always good to share across Scotland. It inspires people and encourages people. And yeah, you are right. But the thing is, sometimes people think it's more complicated than it is, and so it puts them off. And Sonia's right. I mean, the people are there, and it's just about recognizing those relationships. So what I'd probably say is, can you adapt? I would say, well, yes. Or you could do something from scratch. You could do something from an existing project. I think it's really important to do good preparatory work. We would say to people, if you're planning from scratch and you've never done it before, get in touch. We have free training that you could take part in. Planning is really important. But we also have training that's free online, and we have a day's training as well. But it's just about how you think about how you plan it, because it does need a little bit of a mediator, someone to bring the groups together. And if you do it all together in a winner, you could end up, you know, maybe the project wouldn't work so well. So we kind of suggest that you work with both groups separately before you bring them together, so that they're prepared to meet each other. And if there's any boo-boos going to turn up, that somebody thinks something and somebody else thinks something else, we can look at stereotypes and how older people think about younger people, what younger people might think about older people, and it breaks down barriers before they meet. I think that you could involve your project by involving the people who will be in the project to make decisions on planning it, because it's with them. So it shouldn't be planned by you separately and then decide, oh, we're just going to get them to do that. It's about speaking to them. I'll give you an example. I think it's a lovely one. Recently, Knightswood Community, they did a community survey because they have an old swimming pool that is, it's not been used since the 80s. And so they asked the community, what will we do with this? And the community came back and said overwhelmingly, we would like to have an intergenerational space. So the community have asked for that. So it's going to be put together, and the architects, and it'll be built, and it'll be an intergenerational space. So as far as the project's concerned, and you know, no matter what age we are, we can be apprehensive about meeting others, and we can be quite shy about it. And often at times, especially older men, I've got to say, that are a bit apprehensive about being part of an intergenerational project. So it's kind of looking for, you know, bringing them together, getting them feeling familiar with each other, or getting prepared to be together. And as Sonia had said about the projects with the war, I mean, it could be anything. It could be something to do with history, which is fantastic, or it could be sports, or it could be cooking, or it could be planning to have like a big lunch, or whatever it may be. But it's important that good planning, it will determine the success. And also, you might want to evaluate it. And you might be looking at funders, you might be looking for some financial assistance too. But it's something, if you plan well and you evaluate well, other people can replicate it, and you can see if things went wrong and how you could change it next time. So it's all very important that planning is there.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I feel like that's such a great way to kind of simplify it, and you've really pulled out the kind of key themes there that people need to think about. You know, think about your planning, talk to the groups beforehand, and really, I think it's so important. I'm very glad that you mentioned it, actually, that idea of, you know, planning things with people, not for people. Because, you know, if you want people to get really enthusiastic about something, the best way to do that is to make them part of that process as well.
I've got a few questions about that you could think about as well. So when you are planning, you could think about where we're going, why we're doing it, and how we're going to get there. So you can actually think about that too. So, you know, I think just to, you know, plank a group of different generations together, it's fine for a one-off event like Big Lunch, because there's a purpose there, and that's a really good thing. And it might happen once a year. But if it's a long-term project, we'd really need to think about why you're doing it and what the outcomes may be.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Bella. We're starting to get some questions through now, which I'd like to share with you both. And again, please do just keep your questions coming. We're going to be finishing up the session probably about 10-15 minutes, so we have time for some more questions. One of the big themes, unsurprisingly, is COVID. And I think actually we only mentioned COVID once. What a little holiday that we didn't think about COVID for half an hour. But people are asking, actually, what has been the impacts of this on the projects that you work on? Now, Sonia, you mentioned this when you were speaking, that actually the younger people in Scalaway were actually in the middle of doing their interviews when COVID hit, didn't they?
Yes, unfortunately they had to stop, and but we were almost finished gathering the information and research, so the book actually went ahead. I think if it hadn't been for COVID, I would have had difficulty collating it, finding the time to collate the book. So that was a plus for lockdown, actually. But certainly COVID did have an impact on that project.
Yeah.
Go on, Bella.
Well, I just wanted to finish off with planning, because I think there was another couple of things, and it probably would fit in with COVID too. But when the work's carried out, people would need to do a little bit of if they are working with vulnerable groups and they are working with children and there is safeguarding required, there's lots of things to be thinking about. But also they need to kind of think, what are the aims, work out their action plans, look at their budget and what they require, prepare staff and build support, ensure structure for participants, and how, so there's lots of ways of planning, so it depends what they're planning. And as far as COVID is concerned over the past year, I'm just amazed with the resilience of people coming up with things that they can do, but while apart. Virtual, we're here, I wouldn't be meeting Sonia unless I went to the islands to see her. So there's been stuff that's been kept alive very well. Actually, they've done very well to keep it going, like knitting projects online and singing and choirs and pen pals and sending notes and messages and gardening, and I could go on. So people have managed to adapt, and what is it they say, necessity is mother's invention. So
yes, necessity is the mother of invention. I love that expression.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. You mentioned about planning for work with vulnerable adults, Bella, and that is again something that's come up in the questions as well. What advice would you give to people who are approaching this? Because obviously I think for many of us as lay people, when we start talking about protection and actually how we support vulnerable adults, it can feel a little bit scary and a little bit overwhelming. So what do people need to know? What should we be thinking about?
Well, Kate will probably, I see that Kate, my colleague's here today, so she'll post something on the link that we have a safeguarding guide about working with vulnerable adults. But I would probably say the people who normally do have it all set up, and that's the way it goes. They've got it all prepared, nurseries and care homes and you know, people working with people with difficulties, whatever that might be. And I would think that in many cases they already have it set up. And community groups, I mean, Sonia's saying that she's a SCIO, so their SCIO would be, they've set up in such a way that if they are having people entering the community centre, it's already been set up that it's there. And insurance, if it's liability insurance and stuff, it's a bit of a minefield, right? But the main thing is most people do know, and those who don't, please get in touch, or Kate will share, she's shared it now actually, the safeguarding guide. Just be sensible.
I'm getting a real sense of reassurance from you, Bella, that actually it's you know, it doesn't have to be hard, it doesn't have to be complicated, but if people need help, they can come to you for the technical stuff, safeguarding, anything like that. It sounds like there's a lot of really good resources that you have.
There's really good resources, and I think the thing to remember is when you read, you'll see that if you look online for the Scottish Government's, you know, the guidelines. I mean, generally speaking, PVGs they're set up for people who are working with vulnerable groups or who are working with children. But I mean, like if I got on a bus today and there was lots of children on the bus, I don't need a PVG to be there. I don't need a PVG to go into my community centre. So I think that, you know, there is a thin line of those who need it and others. So I would check out the government website, information on it too, if anyone's concerned. Sonia, what's your experience of that?
Well, we have all that policies and procedures in place, vulnerable adults and working with children, and all our staff and our key volunteers are PVG checked. So we've got all that in place, and we have to have that in place if you're applying for funding as well.
Yeah, so and the likes of if you're working with a school or a nursery or a care home or a college, across the board, they'll have that in place too. So each institution would have that in place. If it's a community event like the big lunch, and it's a bit like get-togethers for the Food for Life get-togethers, people go along. You can't PVG your whole community.
No, you don't need the PVGs for that. The same as any kind of fundraising, soup and sweet or coffee mornings, that kind of thing, because children are generally there with their adults, their parents or some other adult. So yeah, you don't need it for that.
No.
Now we have a question come up, always a popular question, funding. Kate from Generations Working Together has also put a really helpful link to the Generations Working Together website on what funding opportunities there are. But do either of you have any tips or advice for people looking for funding?
I have some. So from my previous role, and I'm sure Sonia will have some too, but I used to work in as with a TSI and did funding applications for a few years with different orgs. And it's always that kind of, there are various funding funders out there that you can apply for, but it's that kind of thing when you're filling it in, you know, what is it for? Who said they want it? What difference is it going to make? And how do you know that? So there's these key questions that you must answer. And I think Sonia will agree, it's the filling in of the application, ensuring that you actually say what it is.
Yes, an awful lot of the funders are looking for plain English now, whereas at one time buzzwords was the great thing. But I think if you keep it as simple as Bella says and cover everything that you need to cover and evidence that it is something that the community wants, then quite often you get successful funding bids in. We are awful lucky in Shetland where we have a grants officer with the local authority that sends out information on granting bodies every month. So we have an up-to-date kind of list, which is helpful. We also have businesses locally that, Scottish Sea Farms, for example, that have Heart of the Community Fund that we can tap into. And there's various other ways of raising money for events or for projects and that. But I do think when you're applying for funding from external funders in particular, you have to have the evidence there that there's a need.
That's wise advice indeed. I think really goes back to what we were saying earlier about if you're involving people in developing something that they want to do, you are demonstrating that there's a need. It gives you the opportunity to say to a funder, well, we spoke to the community and this is what they wanted. Can you help us make it happen? But I also love your point there, Sonia, of there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to get money for your project. We've got, again, another question that people are really keen on is about actually the technological barriers that people are facing at the moment, because Zoom is both a blessing and a curse when it's the only way that we have of communicating with each other. Have either of you had any difficulty engaging with people who are perhaps not so confident or less able to use technology? And have you had any experience with that?
Well, I'm a firm believer in learning all the time, and Zoom is something that I've learned since lockdown. I was involved in a project Connecting Scotland that was offering iPads to some people that were kind of isolated, and we did as a centre pick up on that, and we supported 2 people that hadn't actually worked with tablets before and got them up and running so they could access they could contact their families and they could access the exercise classes and that kind of thing. So we have had some experience in that. And using the telephone, an awful lot of older people do want to hear a voice at the end of the phone. So that's a better way for them to be in touch. But an awful lot of them have actually bought phones and are now more techno savvy. That's what they were before lockdown. So it will be interesting to see when they come back. They might be like the young people and just set their phone on the table when they come to the 60+ club once everything gets back to some normality. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out.
Could I come back in the funding? Because I saw someone saying you don't really need funding, and actually I agree there. There's loads of stuff that you can do that's intergenerational in your communities that doesn't cost much at all. And I think that's really important. Although there will be projects that require some funding, there is stuff that can be there. And a lot of the work that's been done, we've got now, by the year 2020, so it was last year, nursery times were put up to 1140, so they were doubled, and there's more outdoor kind of activities being involved in doing things outdoors. So for post-COVID, if there's more outdoor activities and there's more intergenerational spaces, it might just be a case of being part of the day for older people or younger people to meet up and do some form of walking or something together, or some kind of gardening thing that needn't cost a lot of money. So I think that there's a thin line between needing funding, but also there's stuff that we can do that doesn't cost much at all. But as far as the techno stuff's concerned, we've got a couple of projects who've actually won awards. Tomorrow, I can't announce who they are today, but tomorrow, 2 digital awards for 2 projects who managed to keep things going. And some of these stories that we've got across Scotland have been things like, at the beginning of lockdown in March, I know that Argyll carers, North Argyll carers, they had to phone everyone. They said, oh, we can't get anyone to do the whole, you know, the phone, the Zoom thing. But now we're here, they're doing Zoom workouts and they're knitting and they're doing some other things. And so that's quite remarkable, because I know that the worker there had said, oh, it's impossible. And here it's happened. So like what Sonia said, a lot of people are more tech savvy and it's coming. I would say AbilityNet are fantastic. So if anyone has anything that they want, someone that has having difficulty, AbilityNet are offering free help support for anyone aged over 50. I'm sure it is, sure that's the age. And they're fantastic. I spoke to a lady and she helps, and she actually can go in and do groups once things are better, once COVID is cleared up. So I would say go to AbilityNet, they're very good.
That's brilliant, thank you. I would keep coming back to necessity being the mother of invention. You know, if we, and it works both ways, doesn't it? You know, you have to think about what is the biggest barrier. If the biggest barrier is that we can't see each other face to face, then we'll find a way of doing it another way. And if the biggest barrier is that people can't use Zoom, we'll find a different way of doing it. And there's lots of different ways that you've listed there. I'm personally a huge fan of getting outdoors, personally because I know that if I don't get outdoors myself, I start to go a little bit and don't feel so great in the evenings. I need to get outside, stretch my legs. And I know a lot of people feel the same. So the idea of using that as the basis for connecting with other people is wonderful. I am aware that we're running out of time, which is, I wish that we had more, because actually we've got a lot of conversation going on in the chat. I feel like people would love to carry this on for longer, but unfortunately we are going to have to start to wrap up. Firstly, we will send up a follow-up email and we'll try and share the links that people have shared in the chat to things like AbilityNet, the resources on the Generations Working Together website. And we will also send around just a short survey. It's been amazing to see so many of you on the call today. And if you do have 5 minutes when you get that email, just to tell us about if this was useful, what was useful, anything that you think could have been done differently. We would love to hear that. We run these sessions and sessions like this very often, and we're always looking for ways to make them better. So please do be honest and tell us what you think. I just want to again make sure that you know that again, Generations Working Together have a fantastic website that is full of helpful resources. It's in the chat, but we will also signpost to it in the email. Sonia mentioned the Big Lunch. The Big Lunch is an event that we organise and run across the UK every year, and we are going to be announcing our plans for the Big Lunch in the not too distant future. So if that sounds like something that you might be interested in as a way of connecting people in your community, you can go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, and we will give you all the latest information as soon as we have it. It feels quite exciting for us, the possibility that we might actually be able to meet up for lunch face to face this year. Fingers crossed, touch wood. Please do sign up on the website if you would like more information on that. And finally, if you enjoyed the session and you'd be interested in coming along to more Eden Project community sessions, we post all our sessions on our Facebook page, which I believe that my colleague Sean has linked to in the chat. So please do come along in future weeks. We try and create spaces for people to, like we have today, come along, share experiences, share ideas, and get to know each other. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, we would love to see you at a future session. But I think that is all we have time for. And so I'm just going to thank again Sonia Inkster from Scalable and Bella from Generations Working Together. It's been brilliant to get so much of your experience and insight today. So thank you so much for giving up your time. And a huge thank you to all of you for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. I've certainly learned a lot. And I hope that this inspires you to go on and maybe start your own intergenerational project. But thank you so much for coming and enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully you'll see you soon.